The earth shakes beneath your boots. Explosions rip the night sky. Blinding flashes tearing the horizon. Your lungs burn from smoke and poison gas. Ahead, men climb ladders, charging into a storm of bullets. You grip your rifle, knowing survival is a coin toss. This is not a nightmare. It's the Western Front, 1916. World War I was unlike any war before it. It wasn't about swift victories or glorious cavalry charges. It was about endurance, terror, and death, played out in the endless trenches that carved Europe in two. When war broke out in 1914, leaders promised it would be short. German armies stormed into Belgium, pushing toward Paris in a campaign of speed and shock. But at the Marne, French and British forces stopped them. Then came the race to the sea. Both sides tried to outflank each other, stretching trenches northward until the line reached the North Sea. To the south, the Alps anchored the defenses. By winter, Europe was divided by a 475-mile scar of trenches from the Channel to Switzerland. What had begun as a war of movement collapsed into stalemate. Each army faced the other across a wasteland where survival, not victory, became the measure of success. From this moment, the war was defined not by ground gained, but by lives lost. Life inside a trench was misery without end. Mud reached the knees. In heavy rain, trenches collapsed, burying men alive. Rats thrived on corpses left half buried in the walls. The stench was constant, a foul cocktail of sewage, sweat, gunpowder, and decay. Soldiers itched endlessly from lice, which carried trench fever, an illness of fevers, headaches, and pain that could last weeks. Then came trench foot. Standing for hours in freezing water caused flesh to swell, crack, and rot. In severe cases, amputation was the only option. At dawn and dusk, soldiers stood to arms, rifles aimed into the midst. At night, patrols crawled into no man's land, searching for enemy movement or dragging back the wounded. And through it all, the fear of sudden death, a sniper's bullet, a mortar shell, a gas attack carried silently by the wind. For many, the trench was not a battlefield. It was a coffin they just hadn't been buried in yet. Between opposing trenches lay no man's land, a wasteland of craters, wire, and corpses. To cross it was to walk into hell. Generals unleashed artillery barrages lasting hours, even days, in hopes of smashing defenses. At the Battle of Verdun, French troops endured 60 million shells in 10 months. The bombardment shook the ground like earthquakes, but rarely destroyed machine gun nests buried deep underground. When the shelling stopped, the attack began. Soldiers climbed from their trenches, charging in waves. Whistles blew, boots pounded the mud, and within seconds, machine guns cut them down. At the Somme in 1916, British soldiers advanced shoulder to shoulder, expecting little resistance after 7 days of bombardment. Instead, German guns opened fire. In a single day, nearly 57,000 men fell. The front hardly moved an inch. No man's land wasn't fought for, it was fed with lives. The stalemate pushed nations to invent new horrors. At Ypres in 1915, German forces released chlorine gas. Soldiers coughed until their lungs bled. Their eyes burned shut. Some drowned in their own fluids. Gas masks soon followed, but terror lingered. At any moment, the wind could carry death unseen. Later, mustard gas burned skin and blinded men for life. Flamethrowers erupted at close range, jets of fire forcing men from bunkers. Tanks rumbled onto the battlefield in 1916, armored giants designed to crush barbed wire and lead assaults. Planes, once scouts, strafed trenches and dropped bombs. Technology made the war deadlier, but not shorter. For every innovation, a countermeasure followed. The trenches remained. The Western Front had become a laboratory of killing, progress measured only in corpses. Yet even in hell, humanity flickered. Soldiers shared cigarettes, told jokes, and clung to letters from home. They carved dugouts into the walls, decorated them with photos and scraps, anything to remember life beyond the front. And sometimes humanity broke through the madness entirely. On Christmas Eve 1914, guns fell silent. German and British troops sang carols across the wire. By morning, they met in no man's land, shaking hands, exchanging gifts, even kicking around a football. For a few hours, enemies were friends, but commanders ordered the war to resume, and the same men who had sung together were forced to kill each other once again. The Western Front became a graveyard of hope. Verdun, 1916, 10 months, 700,000 casualties. The Somme, over 1 million dead and wounded. Passchendaele, 1917. Rain turned the battlefield into a sea of mud so deep it swallowed men, horses, and even tanks. Time and again, offensives promised breakthrough. Time and again, they delivered slaughter. At Passchendaele, some soldiers drowned where they stood, dragged under by the very earth. Survivors spoke of seeing only the tops of helmets vanish into the muck. Each battle ended the same way. Lines barely shifted, armies shattered, and cemeteries filled. It was not a war of victory, it was a war of erosion. An entire generation ground into the soil of Europe. By 1917, exhaustion spread across the continent. French units mutinied, refusing to charge into machine guns. German civilians starved under naval blockade. Russia collapsed in revolution, leaving Germany free to focus on the West. Then America entered the war. Fresh troops, fresh money, and fresh industry tipped the scales. By 1918, Allied offensives unleashed a storm of tanks, artillery, and planes. German forces, drained and hungry, began to collapse. On November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. The trenches were abandoned, left as scars on the land, but for those who survived, the memories never faded. World War I claimed more than 16 million lives, but the trenches of the Western Front left scars beyond numbers. They taught the world that modern war was not about honor or glory. It was about machines, mud, and massacre. Even today, farmers in France and Belgium still unearth rusted shells, bones, and barbed wire, the iron harvest of a war that refuses to disappear. The trenches remind us that progress without humanity leads only to ruin. The trenches may be gone, but their echoes remain, because history never dies. It just echoes.